Welcome back to Midnight Tales. Before we dive into tonight's story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happens in this one will completely change how you see the people you underestimate. Emma Reyes had been a nurse at Fort Bragg Regional Medical Center for exactly 2 months when her coworkers decided she needed to be taught a lesson. It wasn't anything she'd done wrong, not really. It was simply that she was new, eager, and a little too confident for their liking, the kind of rookie who asked questions in front of senior staff and occasionally offered opinions nobody had asked for. So when a new patient came in, a decorated Navy SEAL named Commander Jack Delaney who had lost most of his hearing in an IED blast during his final deployment, the charge nurse, a sharp-tongued veteran named Carla Whitfield, saw an opportunity too good to pass up. "He's all yours, Reyes," Carla said with a smirk, sliding the chart across the counter. "Communication's going to be a real challenge with this one. Good luck." What Carla didn't say, what she and 2 other nurses had been snickering about in the break room only minutes earlier, was that Commander Delaney had a reputation. Gruff, impatient, notoriously difficult with staff who couldn't communicate with him properly, he'd apparently reduced 2 nurses to tears during a previous hospital stay and had a habit of refusing treatment from anyone who couldn't keep up with his rapid, clipped lip reading and short temper. They'd handed Emma this assignment specifically because they expected her to fail spectacularly, expected her confidence to crumble under the weight of a patient who had zero patience for rookies fumbling through basic communication. What none of them knew, what Emma had never once mentioned in 2 months of quiet, competent shifts, was that her younger brother had been born profoundly deaf. She had grown up fluent in American Sign Language before she'd ever learned proper English grammar in school, spending her childhood interpreting for her brother at doctor's appointments, school conferences, and family gatherings where relatives didn't bother to learn more than a handful of basic signs. She had spent years perfecting not just the mechanics of ASL but the deeper fluency of reading someone's frustration, patience, and needs through expression and gesture alone. Emma walked into Commander Delaney's room with his chart in hand, fully expecting the difficult, dismissive patient her coworkers had described with such relish. Instead, she found a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s sitting rigid on the edge of his hospital bed, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the room with the wary alertness of someone who had spent years learning to read every possible threat before it materialized. Bandages wrapped his left ear and temple, evidence of the surgery he'd undergone just days earlier. He looked up at her with the same guarded expression he'd apparently given every nurse who'd walked through that door, the look of a man bracing for another frustrating, humiliating exchange. Emma set the chart down, took a slow breath, and raised her hands. "Hello, Commander. My name is Emma. I'll be your nurse today." She signed it cleanly, precisely, without hesitation, her fingers moving with the fluid ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. Commander Delaney's entire posture shifted in an instant. His eyebrows rose, his shoulders dropped from their defensive set, and something that looked almost like disbelief crossed his weathered face. "You sign," he responded, his own hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned ASL during months of rehabilitation, though clearly out of necessity rather than lifelong familiarity. "Nobody here signs. I've been writing everything down on a notepad for 3 days. My brother is deaf," Emma signed back, allowing herself a small smile. "I grew up signing. Let's figure out how to make this stay easier for you." What followed over the next several days was nothing like what Carla Whitfield and the other nurses had anticipated when they'd assigned Emma to the difficult patient as a joke at her expense. Commander Delaney, it turned out, wasn't difficult at all, he was simply exhausted, isolated, and deeply frustrated by weeks of being unable to properly communicate his needs, his pain levels, his fears about a hearing loss that had ended the only career he'd ever known. Every interaction with hospital staff before Emma had been reduced to scribbled notes and awkward, slow lip reading that left him feeling like a burden rather than a patient. With Emma, everything changed. She signed his medication schedule clearly each morning. She explained his physical therapy exercises in full, nuanced detail instead of the clipped, simplified notes other staff had been leaving him. She sat with him during difficult moments when the reality of his permanent hearing loss weighed heaviest, signing patiently as he processed grief over a career and an identity he felt slipping away from him, something he hadn't been able to fully articulate to anyone since the blast that changed his life. "You have no idea what this means," he signed to her one evening, nearly a week into his stay, his hands moving slower, heavier with emotion. "Everyone else looks at me like I'm broken. Like I'm an inconvenience. You're the first person who's talked to me like I'm still a person." Word of the transformation spread quickly through the ward. Nurses who had expected to hear stories of Emma's humiliation instead heard Commander Delaney requesting her by name for every shift, heard him laughing, actually laughing, during physical therapy sessions for the first time since his admission. Carla Whitfield, increasingly uncomfortable with how badly her joke had backfired, found herself avoiding eye contact whenever Emma walked past the nurse's station, now trailed by genuine gratitude from a patient everyone else had written off as impossible. The real turning point came during a hospital-wide staff meeting nearly 2 weeks later, when the hospital's chief of staff, Dr. Raymond Chen, stood before the assembled nursing staff with a formal letter in hand. Commander Delaney, it turned out, hadn't just been a difficult patient recovering from surgery. He was being honored with a Purple Heart and a Silver Star for actions during his final deployment, actions that had saved the lives of 6 members of his unit during an ambush that ultimately cost him his hearing. The hospital had arranged a small, formal ceremony to honor him before his discharge, and Commander Delaney had specifically requested that Emma Reyes stand beside him during the presentation as his interpreter, and, as he put it in the note he'd handwritten for Dr. Chen, "the only person in this building who ever treated me like I still mattered." Carla Whitfield stood in the back of that ceremony alongside the other nurses who had orchestrated the entire joke, watching as Emma Reyes, the rookie they tried to humiliate, stood proudly at the side of a decorated war hero, translating his heartfelt words of gratitude to hospital staff and family members gathered for the occasion. There was no triumphant confrontation, no dramatic call-out of the nurses who had tried to set her up for failure. Emma didn't need one. The truth had revealed itself entirely on its own, in the quiet, steady competence she'd shown every single day since walking into that hospital room for the first time. After the ceremony, as staff began filing out, Carla approached Emma hesitantly, her earlier smugness entirely gone. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "About your brother. About any of it." "You didn't ask," Emma said simply, without malice, without triumph. "Nobody ever does." It was true, and it was the quiet heart of everything that had happened over the past 2 weeks. Emma hadn't succeeded because she'd proven a point or humiliated her coworkers in return. She'd succeeded because she'd simply been herself, bringing a lifetime of quiet, hard-earned skill to a moment that demanded exactly what she had to offer. Commander Delaney left the hospital days later with his hearing permanently altered but his spirit restored, carrying with him not just his medals but a newfound friendship with a nurse who had seen past his gruffness to the frightened, grieving man underneath, because she understood something so many people never bothered to learn, that patience and understanding aren't tricks you perform, they're simply who you choose to be, especially when nobody expects it of you. Emma Reyes continued working at Fort Bragg Regional Medical Center long after Commander Delaney's discharge, her reputation among both staff and patients transformed entirely by 2 weeks that had begun as someone else's cruel joke. She never spoke of the incident with bitterness. She simply kept showing up, kept signing patiently with the handful of deaf and hard-of-hearing patients who passed through the ward in the months that followed, and kept proving, quietly and without fanfare, that the coworkers who had tried to set her up for humiliation had instead handed her the opportunity to show exactly who she truly was. If this story moved you, make sure you're subscribed to Midnight Tales so you never miss the next one. New stories of hidden strength, quiet heroism, and unexpected justice, every single week. Drop a comment below and let us know what part of this story hit you hardest. We'll see you in the next tale.